Amazing man, one of my heroes, Alex Epstein here at IdeaCity. Great to see you, Alex.
Hey, how's it going?
I'm not kidding when I say one of my heroes. Here's why. You're an intellectual hero for me because you have a clarity of thought on issues like fossil fuels and global warming that is lacking out there. I come from the political side of things, so I think about what phrase works and how do we appeal to people. But you start from the opposite. You say, well, first principles, right?
Yeah, although you find that if you're super clear, it's easier to convince other people.
Yeah.
In my experience. So I advise a lot of different people on clarity, but they usually start from the standpoint of, oh, let's get some slick PR guy. My view is, why not get a perspective that has already been convinced himself?
Yeah.
Why hire PR people that haven't been convinced of, they can't even convince themselves, how they're going to convince other people?
You know, it's a thoughtful observation. It's my view that a lot of the people involved in PR for the oil companies actually don't like their product. They're not proud of it. They feel like maybe they're selling something immoral. I mean, they've sort of internalized the hate, or they're not even thoughtful. But if you don't love something, you can't sell something.
Yeah, and I think both of those categories are important. So there's a category of an outright distaste for it, but there's also the issue of being thoughtful.
Yeah.
And what I try to encourage in talking about the moral case for fossil fuels is that you need to think about the full case against you and then know the case for you. You can't just have talking points because it's not going to get through to somebody. You're not going to have the sincerity. You're not going to have the conviction.
You know what? Just today, the Pope, who is a fellow who comes from a philosophical, theological point of view, he's a fellow that you would think, you would hope, spends most of his time thinking. Said something that was so dumb. You know what? I'm going to pull out my phone because he said it on Twitter, and I want to read it to you verbatim.
He said it on Twitter. This is
which is a bad sign.
Damning the technologies that make Twitter possible. Of course.
Well, isn't that a great point? So right there, the very fact that he's expressing himself. And I mean, he lives a high fossil fuel lifestyle. He jets around. I mean, can I read to you what he said? And I'm just quoting the Pope here. He said, "The Earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth."
Yeah, I think that's
crazy.
I think that encyclical I would describe as an immense pile of filth.
Okay, well, let's not call names. My point is, he's saying the Earth looks like a pile of filth.
Right.
But in fact, it's fossil fuels and industry and wealth that allows us to clean things up.
Now, I like to use the example of even let's take the Pope from 300 years ago. You transport that Pope to today, say who has a better environment? 300 years ago before fossil fuels or now after fossil fuels? The former Pope, if he had any honesty, would say, oh my gosh, you have the best environment. Your water is so clean. You can warm up when it's cold. You can cool off when it's warm.
There's no sewers in the streets. You have water treatment centers.
You're free of disease comparatively. You don't have all these animals.
Yeah, you don't dump garbage in the streets.
So great. So the question is, how can he call it filth? And the reason is there's this dogma that anything that man creates is evil and anything that man doesn't create is good.
And that's related to this.
He's bought into that.
It's related to this idea that the natural state of the environment is the ideal state. And if only humans didn't despoil it, where in fact the natural state is very harsh on man. What was the life expectancy even in North America 200 years ago? Maybe 30?
Maybe 30.
Because the natural environment is hard. If you don't have air conditioning, if you don't have heating, if you can't protect yourself. I mean, this is from your remarks. If a thunderstorm, we think it's beautiful and amazing. Tell that to someone 500 years ago who sees terror and death and destruction. It
destroys their entire life's work, their home, and it can destroy their entire family. You ever seen that show Naked and Afraid? I've become fond of it. It's this popular show. I think it's on Discovery. And you have these two people, survivalists, mind you, put out in nature, and they are just tortured, and it's miserable.
I've seen ones like that. I've seen Survivor Man.
Yeah,
when he goes out just with nothing.
This is just as bad or worse. And you think about it, everyone should watch that show and then look at what the Pope said and ask which is filthy. Because they're going in the non-filthy world according to his standard, and it is filthy.
You know what? He said another one. I mean, I'm not going to go through his tweets, although it's quite something. I didn't even think of the fact he's using Twitter, which uses power, uses carbon, which is the apex of our civilizational industrial. Well, that's your group.
Center for Industrial Progress.
Industrial progress. And the left that uses the word progress for every regressive idea.
Yes.
Progress, the great progress we can all agree on, even not in our words but through our actions, is industrial progress.
and more broadly, human progress. And what's interesting about the left is while it's always had anti-progress policies, until the 60s, it was at least theoretically in favor of human progress.
Yeah. Well,
but in the 60s, it became anti-human.
Look at those old communist propaganda posters. It was for workers controlling the means of production, but at least they believed in production. To them, a smokestack on a factory was glamour.
It was a sign of life.
A sign of life, but it's what they wanted.
Yes.
They were never against factories. They just said, we want to own the factories, not the capitalists.
Right.
Today's progressives don't even want the factory.
So as far as the Pope goes, I was just thinking, so there's an issue of the modern Pope. He uses Twitter. It completely depends on fossil-fueled civilization. Basically, there are two ways that the Pope can be this lavish, rich figure and have all the luxuries of the world, including Twitter. One, the historical way, is by basically enslaving the population to a feudalist system so that you can be a parasite on them. That's the historical approach. Or you can have a civilization where everyone is super productive and we improve nature. So he's going to take us back to the feudalist one. He's still going to be on top.
Well, the way an ordinary person in Canada or the United States lives today would be how a 1%er lived 50 years ago. And a 0.0001% or 100 years ago. In fact, I once read a stat that a 1%er in the world is someone in Canada making about 34 grand.
Oh, probably,
and it's because of industry. It's not because of economic system, although the economic system led to the industry. It's not because of religion. It's not because of race. It's not because of ethnicity. It is because of industrial civilization.
Yeah, and then the ideas behind that. The ideas of liberty and reason and respect for the individual.
It's got nothing to do with geography or race or ethnicity.
No, I mean you can stick it anywhere, and that's why if the Pope or the G7 or anyone else, they should be concerned with what's going to further human progress. And if you look at the record, it's freedom and fossil fuels.
Yeah. I want to ask you one last thing. You've been on tour in Canada. You just gave a speech in Calgary, the Palliser Hotel. The place was jam-packed. I read a great review of it in the in post-media papers. Tell me, you're based in LA, which is a really industrial city.
Well, I'm in Laguna Beach, so I just live on the beach.
But there's also, it's also the hotbed of a lot of Hollywood anti-industry propaganda. And that's the same sort of hypocrisy of the Pope. You got the Daryl Hannah, you've got Neil Young, you've got all these high fossil fuel, high carbon footprint celebrities that are anti-industry. And I would say they don't even try and be as philosophical as the Pope.
I think that's an understatement. But it's kind of like a spoiled child. You have a spoiled child of an industrialist, basically the entire Rockefeller family after John D. Rockefeller, and they don't bother to understand the causes. So they just enjoy the riches and they think, well, they're just here. Why would anyone work? Why are these guys getting dirty? They don't realize that these guys getting dirty are the only reason they can live in their clean homes.
I got a phrase I like to use. People today who have not studied or personally observed industry, you say, where does power come from? They say, well, duh, the plug in the wall. Where does food come from? Duh, the freezer. Because they don't know where these things, people who are against coal, against mining, well, where does your steel come from? Where does your stuff ride a bike? Where did the metal from your bike
come from besides the ground? That's what I want to know.
If we only have to rely on rocks that we pick up, we would have no metal, no bicycles. Okay, I put myself on a big tangent there because I was having so much fun with you. Last question. You've been on tour in Canada. Your book came out last year, The Moral Case for Fossil Fuels. How's the reception been? And give me a breakdown. How are people in the oil and gas industry? How about politicians? How about media? How about severely normal people? What are people saying to you?
I actually think the methods of persuading people are fairly consistent if you have an argument that is based on maximizing human well-being, because most people, if that's the explicit goal, will accept it. Now, those who don't, I can't do anything about them, but they're in the minority. So what I found is that on a person-to-person basis, if someone picks up that book, it's persuasive. And I wrote it for a liberal, so it was meant to be able to persuade anyone. Now, what I would like them to do more, what I like people to do more is share it, because I don't think people understand these days how powerful it is to share materials. But if you look at every movement in history, it's all about sharing materials, whether you're a communist or an American, individualist in the Revolutionary War. It's all about passing out knowledge to people.
And how's the book doing?
It's doing really well, but I want it to do better. Ultimately,
what's the website?
Ultimately, moralcaseforfossilfuels.com. I'm not happy until I see the Republican Party championing fossil fuels proudly instead of being reactive and having all these stupid talking points.
Any oil companies in Canada giving you, I'm not the time of day, giving you the compliment of stealing your stuff?
Starting to, but I would like them to steal a lot more.
Yeah. It's great to see Alex Epstein, one of my heroes, the moral case for fossilfuels.com. Is the
moral
word,
case
more,
for
so know the
fossilfuels.com.
word the there. Moral case for fossilfuels.com. Nice to see you, my friend.
All right.
Keep
Thanks,
up the
man.
fight. You're watching TheRebel.media.